West Seattle Signet lead, and also Sandra Fan, the high capacity transit manager, development manager for us. We're going to have a lot of information here, so we're going to try to get through it pretty quickly and then have time for your questions. So we'll let Stephen and Sandra do their thing, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. Our agenda here, we're going to go through our alternative development process for the West Seattle and Ballard project, discuss the level 1 alternatives and valuation results, and then talk about what's coming up in the next few months. So I will turn it over.
All right, just a little bit of a reminder. This West Seattle, we're here to talk about the West Seattle and Ballard link extension. It is part of a broader system expansion that was approved by voters in November of 2016 that includes light rail, bus, rapid transit, Sound Transit Express buses, and is expanding in all directions throughout the region, to the north, to the east, and to the south. In the voter-approved plan called ST3, we had a representative project that was the West Seattle and Ballard link extensions. What it did was identify the mode, which is light rail in this corridor, the general route, and the station locations that would be served by these light rail extensions. And this information really informed the cost estimates that were included in the plan to bring to the voters. It also included milestones or schedule for each of the extensions and information that would feed into the operations plan. So how much fleet would be needed, where maintenance capacity would be needed as the system is built out over time. So a little bit about the West Seattle link extension, because I assume that's what most of you are here for, is the West Seattle portion. The West Seattle extension really would extend from Alaska Junction Neighborhood, so right in this area, to SoDo in 2030, and then ultimately will extend all the way to, will continue along the line all the way to eventually Linwood and Everett by the year 2042. The initial extension, though, that we're talking about is the extension from Alaska Junction to the stadium area that will open in 2035, actually to SoDo in 2035, and then ultimately continue beyond the stadium station in 2035. So the stations that were included in the ST3 plan are stations at Alaska Junction, Avalon, and Delridge, and then also an upgrade station in SoDo, and then of course the stadium station down the road. So it also includes a new rail-only fixed span crossing of the Duwamish waterway, and the representative project is shown on the south side of the West Seattle Bridge. And the overall length of this extension is about 4.7 miles. So a little bit about the process that we're in now. This is a lot of information. I'll step you through it a little bit. Some of you may have seen this before. This is really a roadmap for our alternatives development process that began late in 2017 and is continuing all the way through April of next year, when we'll go to the Sound Transit Board for them to identify what we call a preferred alternative. We've divided this work into 3 levels. So we're right now in what we call level 1 alternative screening. We'll then move into level 2 and level 3. Talk about that a little bit more, but I just want to point out that some of you may have been aware of the open houses that we held about a month or so ago. This was during a period where we called early scoping, when we solicited input from the public and from everybody who was willing to comment on the project and the representative project, where the alternatives should go, what we should be considering as we determine what the preferred alternative should be. We're also reaching out in a number of different ways. We have neighborhood forums that we're holding now for the project. We've held 2 in the past week, and there's one upcoming that Andrea will talk about later in the presentation here in West Seattle, actually next Saturday. I'll just let the cat out of the bag. And then we're holding neighborhood forums throughout the process. So really, right now we're in level 1, I mentioned. We'll come out again in level 2 and level 3. We also are convening a stakeholder advisory group, and I don't think we have any of our representatives here, but we have 29 representatives throughout the West Seattle and Ballard Link Extension corridor that are meeting monthly and informing our recommendations through the process. They are meeting We just had a meeting actually earlier this week on Tuesday, and we have some information to share from that will be of interest to many of you, I'm sure. We also have an elected leadership group that is comprised of city council members, county council members, the Sound Transit Board members, as well as a port commissioner. And they are meeting at each phase of the project, and they're developing recommendations along the way. And then we're briefing the Sound Transit Board at each of the key milestones so that they are informed enough to be able to identify a preferred alternative in April next year. So again, where we are now is level 1. We conducted our early scoping open houses, and we're right about here now. We're getting ready to transition into level 2 at the end of May, really. So that's a little bit of background about the process and where we are right now. What level 1 and level 2 and level 3 means is that what we're doing is we're evaluating alternatives, we're narrowing them down and refining them, and we're doing that 3 times through the course of the next year to be able to get to the best preferred alternative we can get to in April 2019. And throughout, we are coming out to you as much as we need to keep everybody informed and to solicit input throughout this process. So again, this is a conceptual diagram showing what's happening. We're starting with a broad range of alternatives. We're funneling down. We're hoping to narrow it by a few alternatives, maybe by the end of level 1, moving into level 2, and then we're refining the alternatives. So what you see as a continuous line right now may not be the continuous line that you see in level 2 or in level 3, and ultimately in the project that is constructed. And the overall goal at the end of this process is to reach consensus on a preferred alternative, and also any other alternatives that we'll need to evaluate further in an environmental impact statement. So with that,
thank you, Sandra. Hi, good evening, everyone. Once again, thank you, Amanda, for having us here. What we heard during early scoping is what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm also going to talk to you about the level 1 alternatives and the results of our evaluation, and also give you a quick summary of what the stakeholder advisory group has recommended last Tuesday, 2 days ago. So all the early scoping comment that we have received is summarized in the early scoping report. The period is in February and March. We have 3 public meetings, 1 agency meeting and open houses, 2,800 total comments received. And again, this report is also available on our website if you're interested to see. I also would like to say thank you to Amanda and Rich that we have a chance to talk early April to share your thoughts with us. Thank you very much. The types of input that we have heard, variation in route alignment and configuration, changes to the station locations, the need for good transit connections that include rail to rail and bus to rail, potential impacts and benefits to the community, operational efficiency, and of course, the one that we heard, do it faster. There are other comments that we heard, like bus rapid transit gondola in West Seattle, routes outside Sound Transit 3 scope, like going to Greenwood, Crown Hill, Alki, Admiral, White Sand. We also heard some future design considerations that we can focus on in later phases of the project. So level 1 alternatives and evaluation is what I'm going to talk to you next. So what you see here is a map, and downtown Seattle is way up there, north is up. This is the Duwamish waterway, Soto area here, Harbor Island over here, and this is where we're at, somewhere here, I think. This is the West Seattle Peninsula. And the blue bubbles that you see here are the early scoping major theme comment that we heard during our early scoping period in February and March. That includes, I'm going to start from this side, Soto interim transfer. So what we heard is that in 2030, when light rail opens in West Seattle, operating between Alaska Junction and Soto Station, which requires our customer to transfer into the existing light rail to go into downtown, the concern is that with a train from Tacoma SeaTac be too full that you cannot get on a train. We heard that concern. Secondly, the Soto transfer also for the ultimate configuration in 2035. would that transfer be convenient to go to the airport? Let's say you transfer the train to the airport. It needs to be convenient. We also heard different routing across the Duwamish river crossing. We heard different routing to get from Delridge to Alaska Junction. We also heard the need to preserve industrial operations in the terminal and other industrial business here. We heard the need to minimize neighborhood disruption, consolidated stations, tunnel in West Seattle, route through golf course, the station location at the junction, and the need to accommodate for future extension to the south to White Center and building for future Sound Transit projects. So, with all these early scoping comments, we bring out our crayons and we try to draw and connect to see what we can do to study in level 1. So these are the alternatives that we come up with, and since then, this is the list that we come up with, and since then we develop plan and profile so that we can understand where the elevated guideway is, where's the tunnel is, where's the tunnel portal as represented by the bracket, and also the station's location. So I'm going to go through one by one with you tonight. Let's start first with the Sound Transit 3 representative project. Once again, it's a Soto Station departing elevated, crossing Spokane Street, over Spokane Street Bridge, on the south side, crossing the Duwamish River in a high-level fixed-span bridge, arriving into a peninsula going through the Pigeon Point, elevated, with an elevated station in Delridge, elevated on Delridge southward, and making a turn westward on Genesee, elevated station Avalon here, and then using Fort Roy as an elevated alignment and getting into Alaska Junction with a tailgate at that point westward. So the bubbles that you see here are key findings that we want to share with you. The first one is we've got some constraints through the design and construction through the Duwamish River. The space are very tight. It's difficult to design and construct at the Pigeon Point area because of the steep slope and the risk for slide over there. As the alignment turns from Delridge to Genesee, we also find that there will be neighborhood impacts there. However, the 3 stations are evenly spaced together, so it gives us a very good rider sheds. And finally, the terminal station is constrained. As you know, Alaska Street has buildings on both sides, so it's constrained and very difficult to extend to the south. So, as part of this is the way how we try to summarize our evaluation. We have the evaluation measures on the top. There are 25 of them. We put the Sound Transit 3 representative project as comparative so that we can, as we go through each alignment, we can see whether if it performs better or performs lower when compared to Sound Transit 3 project. And I'm going to highlight some of them for you as we go through the presentation tonight. So the first alternative, the first level 1 alternative is the purple line here. This is called the Pigeon Ridge West Seattle Tunnel Alternatives. Again, departing Soto Station in an elevated station, elevated guideway, and crossing Spokane Street, but this time we actually go further south and sweeping to westward direction and crossing the Duwamish River without touching Harbor Island. It then gets into a tunnel underneath the ridge of the Pigeon Point neighborhood. As the guideway comes out, it's an elevated station straddle over the Delridge and Genesee intersection there with an elevated guideway on the north side of the golf course, enter into another tunnel, and have a station, underground station in Avalon, continue tunneling, and having a north-south station in the vicinity of the 42nd Street. So the gray line that you see here is the Sound Transit 3 representative alignment for comparison. So some key findings that we find as compared to Sound Transit 3 representative project are, it doesn't touch Harbor Island, so it avoids major port areas. However, because of the Superfund site in the lower Duwamish, there's potential in-water work there. There's fewer neighborhood impacts, as we're not sweeping here. We go straight across, and with a tunnel that helps. Also, but we have 2 tunnels and 2 tunnel stations. And we also have a north-south tunnel station which improves the transition to extend to the south in the future. So how does it perform? Let's take a look at the second row, which is the Pigeon Ridge West Seattle Tunnel. It performs better under Sound Transit 3 Long Range Plan. That's to extend to the south because it has a north-south orientation when compared to Sound Transit 3 representative alignment, which is in the east-west. It performs lower under constructability and cost because of the 2 tunnel station and 2 tunnels. However, because it has less curve, fewer curves, so it performs better under operational constraints. And here, it performs lower when compared to ST3 representative project under protected natural resources and built social environments because of the Duwamish crossing possible, Superfund site in waterwork, and then on the north edge of the golf course. The next alignment is the blue line, which is the West Seattle Bridge Fort Roy. It departs Soto Station, again elevated, but this time you don't cross the Spokane bridge. You continue on the north side of the West Seattle Bridge, crossing the Duwamish waterway, again with a high-level fixed-span bridge, arriving in the peninsula with a elevated Dowridge station, sandwiched between the Terminal 5 and the West Seattle Freeway and the new port site here. It continues to use the Fort Roy corridor to get into an elevated Avalon station here, continue elevator on Fort Roy, and then having the elevator station on the 38th Avenue Southwest, which is near the fire station. It also has a street that's kind of split in this area, north-south, and then it starts to turn, set up for the future extension to the south. Key findings. Because it's on the north side of the bridge, it also has design and construction constraints through the port areas. However, this does avoid the pigeon point, but it created an isolated station near the port property sandwiched between Terminal 5 and Newport. It does avoid the neighborhood impacts in the Dowridge and the Genesee corridor. However, will have affects the properties along the Fort Roy way southwest here. And finally, it improves transition to extend to the south. One more thing is that it also avoids a sensitive natural area, which is the Longfellow Creek that flows through there. How does it perform? We look at the third row here. Some highlights are, again, because it's set up in a north-south orientation close to 35th Avenue Southwest, it provides a good future extension to the south. Because of the Dowridge and Alaska Junction Station on the peripheral of land use center, it performs lower under station land use plan consistency and also proximity to urban centers. However, it does avoid the Longfellow Creek and Pigeon Point, so it performs better under protected natural resources. And due to the fact that it is on the north side of the West Seattle Bridge, and affect port and business operations, is performed lower under freight access and business commerce measures. The next alternative is, okay, I'm call it the pink line here. So very similar to what you see before, it departs Soto Station and the elevator station, again on the north side of the West Seattle Bridge, high-level fixed span. But this time, we're crossing and passing over the Newport steel plant and turning into an elevated at-grade partial tunnel station in the vicinity of Yancey and Avalon Way. Then it enters into a tunnel portal and tunnel underneath here and into a north-south tunnel station in the vicinity of Fort Roy, way southwest. So, some key findings. Same thing, design and construction constraints through the port areas. However, it does avoid Pigeon Point. It lessens the effect of the neighborhood, but passes over Newport. This consolidated the Avalon and Dowridge station into Yancey station, so we have less population and employment served with this alternatives. It does have a long tunnel, but it also has a north-south station in the junction, so which accommodate future extension to the south. How does it perform? We look at the fourth row here. First, because of the consolidated station and less population and employment served, it performs lower under projected transit demand and also under station locations per Sound Transit 3 plan that the voter has voted. It does have a long tunnel, so we have potential cost issues here, so it performs lower under the cost measures. It doesn't directly serve the Avalon and Dowridge land use center, so it performs low under land use plan consistency and proximity to urban center. However, it does have fewer neighborhood impacts, so it performs better under a protected built social environment. And finally, because it's also on the north side of the West Seattle Bridge, it performs lower under freight access and business commerce measures. Next alternative is the orange line, which is the Oregon Street, Alaska Junction option. This alignment, similar to the last two that you see, departing Solar Station elevated, crossing on the north side of the West Seattle Bridge, again fixed span, high-level bridge. But this time, after you get to the peninsula, it turns into the Dowridge corridor with a station more south than the ST3 representative project. It then very much follows the Sound Transit 3 alignment, elevated guideway in Genesee, having an elevated station in Avalon. But this time, instead of using the Fauntleroy and Alaska as a corridor, it uses Fauntleroy, Oregon, and 44th Avenue Southwest, with a station in north-south orientation in the vicinity of 44th Avenue, which is one block west of the junction intersection of California and Alaska. Some key findings, same thing that you see here, design construction constraints report. It does avoid the pigeon point steep slope area. So it avoids the Fauntleroy, Alaska in this segment here, but it does affect Fauntleroy here and 44th and Oregon and 44th here. It does provide a north-south orientation which facilitate the future extension to the south. How does it perform? We look at this road over here. As you can see, because it is very much following the Sound Transit 3 project, it performs very comparable to the Sound Transit 3 representative project. However, because of the junction station at 44th Avenue Southwest, which is in close proximity to existing layover for bus layover, it performs better under bus rail integration. Given that it affects Oregon and 44th, it performs lower under protected built social environment. And finally, because of the crossing of the Duwamish is on the north side, and also the elevated guideway is near California, it performs lower under freight access and business and commerce for these alternatives. And finally, the cyan line here is called the West Seattle Golf Course Alaska Junction alternatives. Very similar to Sound Transit 3 representative project, depart Solar Station, elevated guideway on the south side. This time, also using corridor for Dowridge, with a station more south than the representative alignment. Instead of using Genesee and Fauntleroy, this alternative uses the golf course, elevated alignment through the golf course, and getting into a tunnel portal, and have a tunnel underneath Alaska Street with a station in the vicinity of Fauntleroy and 42nd Avenue, and then with a tower track that turns south. Some key findings that we see is because that it's not turning on the Genesee, so we have fewer neighborhood impacts. However, it does affect the golf course, which is a 4F resource, which requires us to demonstrate no other prudent and feasible alternative. It eliminates a station, Avalon, so we have less population and employment served. However, it does have a short tunnel with station underneath the Alaska Street. How does it perform? It performs lower under projected transit demand here because of eliminating the one station. It performs also lower under station proximity to urban center because it doesn't serve Avalon. It also affects the golf course. And finally, due to the golf course 4F resources, it performs lower under protected natural resources and protected built social environment.
Can I ask you something? The golf course is a protected resource?
Yes, so this is the slide that talks about that. So let me go through this slide. So back in 1966, there's an act that stipulates that United States Department of Transportation agencies such as the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, which is where we are under, cannot approve the use of land for publicly owned parks unless if you demonstrate that there's no feasible and prudent avoidance alternative, and that you demonstrate you have performed all possible plan to minimize harm to the property, or the administration, in this case FTA, determines that the use of the property will have de minimis impact, which is the impact doesn't impact the, it's so small that it doesn't affect the use of the land, of the parkland. So this is, so the DOT, Washington State DOT, also under this section 4F. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Could I ask you to clarify something under that act? Does that act apply regardless of how the track transits the property, whether it's above ground or below ground?
It does.
Okay.
It's mostly above. It's below, then there's a chance that we can
So if you were to
demonstrate.
tunnel, there would be an ability to demonstrate?
We can demonstrate. We can do more study and demonstrate that.
Although you probably can't tunnel under the golf course and then still get up to West Seattle, because trains can only climb at like a 7% grade, so geometrically, it doesn't really work.
So would it be possible if I finish my presentation? I just have like 5 more slides, so then we can open and answer your questions. So this is, again, everything together in one slide. I also want to share with you some of the observations that I have when I'm reading the charts in a vertical manner. So the first one is under cost. So as you can see, a lot of the alternatives actually perform lower because they cost more, mostly due to the tunnel and also long span bridges. But one thing I also want to point out is that for the golf course, we find that it is very comparable to the Sun Transit 3, mostly because of the land, of the public land. So we find it a comparable cost for that.
I'm super sorry, but does this take into account the properties that you wouldn't have to acquire?
Yes, that's why they have a comparable. Then the next one is station land use. Most of this too has the Yancey Street has the station, Yancey Station, which is outside the peripheral of the land use center. Same with the isolated dairy station, so that's why it performs lower under this category for station land use plan consistency. And finally, over on this side, these 3 alternatives are on the north side of the West Seattle Bridge, and because it's going through the tunnel, the terminal, the port terminal, that's why we find it performs lower than the other alternatives that goes south or goes further south. So this is the summary slide. On the top are the alternatives that we find very comparable to Sun Transit 3 project. The Pigeon Ridge West Seattle, it's a borderline between having a big challenge because of the 2 tunnels, but it does have lessened the effects of the port and Delridge and Junction in the Delridge neighborhood. The Yancey Street, mostly because of the 2 station, potentially not consistent with Sun Transit plan, requires tunnels, so the cost will be another challenge, but it does also lessen the effect to the Junction and Delridge. The golf course, the major challenge is section 4F that I just described to you earlier. It also eliminates a station, so potentially not consistent with Sun Transit plan, and lessens back to Junction and Delridge, which is a plus. We also heard some suggestions which deemed to be not practical. That includes the tunnel underneath the Duwamish. It is impractical because of the tunnel depth and the length for it to climb up. Putting the light rail on the existing West Seattle Bridge, we find it impractical because the existing structure is not built to accommodate light rail, and also that's also constructively issue is a huge challenge too. We also heard gondola and rail bus shared bridge, and it's not practical because the mode is not consistent with the Sun Transit plan 3 plan that the VOTA has approved. And finally, extension to Alki, Enroll, and etc. Again, it's not included in the Sun Transit plan that the VOTA has approved, and also it's not in the long-range plan. So 2 days ago, I just want to share with you a quick summary of the recommendation from the stakeholder advisory group. The questions that was posed to them is which alternative to carry forward and which alternative not to carry forward. And those under not practical suggestions, they have decided not to carry forward. The Yancey Street and the golf course also in the not carry forward category. Pigeon Ridge, they have recommended to carry forward into the next level. And West Seattle Bridge Front Right, they have recommended not to carry forward in the next level. Oregon Street, they have recommended to carry forward in the next level. Besides this, just carry forward, not carry forward, we are also taking their notes on refinements. So we're in the process of getting those notes. So at this time, I just do not have a very clear idea what kind of refinements that the stakeholder advisory group are recommending. For example, could be some mixing and matching. One thing that I heard correctly is the need to look at Oregon Street, Alaska Junction alignment, but in a tunnel in the junction. So that's what I heard. So we're in the process of collecting the notes, and we hope to use those information together with the elected leadership group and the neighborhood forum input that we got from neighborhood forum, and finally San Transit board briefing to finalize the different alternatives that go to the next level. With that, I'm going to give it to just 3 more slides.
This will be quick. So Stephen took that up very well. So what's happening next in terms of public involvement? These neighborhood forums have started. This is your chance to really, take this information, all this information, discuss with your neighbors, and highlight for us what you're concerned about, what you see opportunities are, and get that input to us so that we can share it with, like Stephen said, Seattle Transit Board, elected leadership group. So we're having our forum here in Seattle next Saturday, and we'll give you sort of the same kind of flavor of what we've done tonight, hopefully consolidate that a little bit so that we can get to the input part. But we'll discuss, your values of your neighborhood. What do you see when light rail comes to your neighborhood, to West Seattle? What's the future vision? And then comment, of course, on these alternatives and the screening process that we bring into level 2. So, again, these alternatives will really help us in this refining process. We really need your input as we go forward in level 2 to help us do that. And with that, we're always welcome, or we're always available to come to any kind of community group you have, or if you have, any concerns, feel free to reach out to us. My phone number, so we can give that to you as well. And with that, we will open it up for questions. Yes. At the front here, go ahead. Yes.
I've been looking at the SD3 website, and I was able to see, like, on the March 14th meeting, the agenda for that meeting and the summary from the first meeting, but I never saw the summary for the March 14th meeting, and now you've just had a third meeting. So do you think
For the stakeholder advisory group?
Yeah.
I'll look into that. I do think that they might be posted online now. I can look into
Okay,
that.
it's been a few days since I looked,
Yeah.
so I just wonder, would this presentation
Yeah.
then be what would be sort of like a summary of what came out of
Of the stakeholder
the
advisory
second
group?
meeting? Yeah. I
It's
mean,
pretty similar
so
to
this
that.
This would be
Mhm.
online also for us to look at?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So, quick point then for this question.
Yeah.
There's the people on the stakeholder advisory group, can we reach them? Because I looked up their names, but there's no contact information, and so why is that not?
I've reached, I know one person, I recognized one person, so I actually sent an email to one person.
And you have
before-
an email address or something?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
before
but
the,
it's not available to
So
Oh,
we're
I-
not in a position to give out their numbers. It's kind of left up to
Yeah.
them to share it if they're willing to. There are a number of them, I think 5 stakeholders in
Yeah, for
West
West
Seattle.
Seattle.
So
Are they
just
public
be aware.
meetings?
Yes, you're welcome to
Yes.
come attend the meetings,
yeah, we can attend.
and you're welcome to come participate in that way.
You can lobby them before or after.
Precisely.
So there's no email alias for the group?
There's not, but if you have any questions, you feel free to send them my way, and we can figure out what to go do from there.
The
But I
names
do
are
think-
listed, so I don't know if you.
Yeah, I tried to find a couple of people online or just by searching, and
Yeah.
I sent emails that I found, and no one responded. And it seems like weird that community representatives would not be reachable by people. So, they should be willing to at least provide an alias for emails.
I don't think,
The other question I had was around this 4F, section 4F thing. So presumably that rule is in place so the federal government doesn't build interstate through the city's parks without having to. So, but this is a different situation, right? This is city's park, and the city wants to build like it is. So if the city reclassified part or what of that park, would that rule be suspended?
So that will be something that's really totally out of San Transit free control.
Right.
But for us, we are going through a city park that's an area that is designated as a city park.
I thought the point of getting this done faster was just a good amount of collaboration between the agencies. This process.
So the act, we cannot
Yeah, it's
force, yeah, we cannot. It has to be coming from the landowner, not,
Okay, so if the.
So if the city came to you and said,
We have to send them down
That would
the
be
Fourth Ave.
Didn't they throw out the golf course plan? They're not moving forward with that plan.
that's what we heard from the recommendation from the ZAC. There is one, ZAC member did propose a modification to try to minimize the golf course impact, but after she described it, it's getting to be very much like the purple line, which is on the north edge of the park.
Is the parking lot considered part of the park? Because there's a huge parking lot adjacent to the West Seattle
Yes,
Stadium.
a stadium, the clubhouse, they're all considered as park. Yeah.
It's the effective function.
Are you guys doing any modeling yet? Maybe it's premature for me to ask this, but are you modeling how it's going to impact the surrounding neighborhood and potentially how many homes you guys are going to have to take in order to do this?
So we will be looking at still at a fairly high level through this alternatives development process, but in level 2, level 3, we'll have a better sense for what the potential property impacts would be. Where we really get into detail is when we enter the environmental review phase. So after the alternatives development process, we'll be going through an environmental impact statement, and that's where we really create volumes of information where we're evaluating everything very, very thoroughly.
So I'm a little concerned that each of those lines, the colored lines are being looked at in isolation, so that there are some good qualities to lines that are being eliminated because some parts of them aren't feasible or cost-effective or impact business. And so I'm worried that because the stakeholder advisory group has been presented these, 5 separate lines compared to the baseline of the preferred alternative, essentially you're eliminating possible solutions to impacts to the community or routing south or so on and so forth by saying, well, it doesn't work because it went north of the bridge.
So can I
Go
can I
ahead.
speak to this a little bit? So the stakeholder advisory group is really one body, one group that's provided recommendations. They have been tasked with providing recommendations. It's not only their voices that will carry in the ultimate recommendation.
Okay.
So these neighborhood forums are very important. These will really inform the refinements. And, they didn't have a whole lot of time really to form their
I guess we were last in alphabetical
recommendations.
order.
And ultimately, their input, the neighborhood forums, input from the agencies really inform the elected leadership group, and they will be taking in a lot more information in their consideration of what should move forward. And then us as a team, it might be that they say one alternative isn't moving forward, but as a team, we're listening to everything that's being heard, and we may be tweaking alignments to, it may be some kind of combination of the best parts of some alternatives that we
We like to.
Is that made clear in the neighborhood forum? Because I'm worried that you're gonna have a huge group of people from the community come and
It
go,
will be made-
I get choice 1 through 5 and that's it. But I think you need to make it clear to the public
Yeah.
that there are elements of each of these alignments that could potentially work and be combined. Yes.
I just want to add a note that they were given all these cards to put in different categories, but they're also given the post-it. So one example, as I remember, I need to look at the notes to make sure I remember correctly. I believe it's on the golf course alignment that they put it under do not carry forward, but they put down they like the Duwamish station location. So we'll have to capture that in notes and take it back and see how we can, as we refine, how we can take that into account.
And same with all Alaska Junction stations. Just because it's on a certain line and that line may not carry forward does not mean that station option may not carry forward.
And just a note, it's a really good point. We've been through 2 of these forums so far, and that was really the focus, is to sort of let people know this is a range of options. They're not, when you eliminate, when you're looking at one thing, you also have to look at the other thing, and so that's something we're hoping to capture as we solicit that feedback.
Are you gonna have all 5 neighborhood session or just the 3?
All of them, yeah. We still want feedback on all of them. Yes, or right in the back there, I'm sorry, in the winter.
Thank you.
I'm concerned about the response that you were getting about the golf course wrap because of that federal law. And, I mean, I've looked at sections like that before in federal land use laws. And the fact that you have to show either one or the other, either that you consider all these other alternatives and this is the best one, or that it's only going to have a de minimis impact. I absolutely believe it's possible to be able to have an above-ground track over some portion of the golf course that would meet not just one, but both of those criteria. And I find it incredibly hard to believe that it just gets, dismissed like that. You guys aren't working hard enough on it. I mean, I really think that there was a possibility to make that work.
Especially, what's the definition of de minimis? Right?
Sure.
Like, can you park underneath the track? I think you could, right? I don't know.
Well, maybe we can have our environmental experts to come.
Yes.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a really, it's a question. It's a good question.
I just wanted to amplify something that you touched on, that you can mix and match a lot of these alternatives. For example, several of the alternatives showed the alignment turning on 40th or 42nd, and you could continue that to 44th under any of those scenarios. You can do, you can mix and match a lot of those things. Just because one of the alignments might show the alignment north of the West Seattle Bridge, you could also do some of them south of the West Seattle Bridge. So, and the stakeholders group from West Seattle is a pretty thoughtful group of people. I watched them the other night making these decisions, and people from all over the city, about 30 people are on this group. They're really very thoughtful. They don't have the final say. The elected officials are going to be meeting soon, and ultimately it'll be the Sound Transit Board's position. So just because they've technically eliminated the golf course doesn't mean it's totally gone or anything. It's, this is a process to get input from as many different sources as possible. That's why they're having all these community meetings, stakeholders groups, elected officials groups. West Seattle is very well represented on the elected officials group with, I believe, 5 members between Executive Constantine, Joe McDermott, and 3 city council members. So we have really good representation on this in this process. All I would say.
Just one thing I'd like to say is I read your original summary of the community input and the generation of these bylaws, and I thought it was really great. I thought you did a really good job coming up with synthesis of the feedback, at least that I heard too, so I think I'm sort of validating, at least my ears heard the same things that yours did. And that the 5 were, I think that the ideal thing to do is to have a significantly different enough range of options that you actually get to look from a few different dimensions as opposed to 5 that are roughly identical. And I think you did a good job with that. The thing, at least, is one thing I'd say is maybe I'm less happy about is the clustering of the ones that they're all more expensive. Like so what I'm concerned about, especially as you triage them and kind of rank them, I would debate some of the Harvey Ball assignments. I guess I'll go into that later. But there is as expensive or more expensive, and there was, at least if it still survives, this concept where you could get a tunnel and not add significant cost to this project. But then if what we're left is let's say we took just the SAGs ones, and that just wound up happening. So either you get the representative alignment, or you have to get more money, because all 3 of those options are more expensive. And so I'm not sure where you start to think about how you're going to fund. I mean, if I was voting, I'd say, yeah, I'll take the pitch and point one, even though it's incredibly expensive, right? But I don't know where that money comes from. And if all we've got to choose from is either elevated, highly disruptive, or the luxury option that's going to require a local improvement district or something like that, and you got to find $300 million, and I'm afraid that we've limited our options and haven't really studied things that might be revealing some other options that might have got eliminated too soon. So what are your comments about funding and that?
Speak to that. So I want to remind everybody, we did this evaluation in 5 weeks after early scoping. So the cost estimates are really less than, more than the representative project. And so In level 2, as we refine the alternatives, we have more time to start looking at costs. We'll actually have some actual cost estimates to look at. And we're still looking, at level 2, we're still looking at things as separate segments, like West Seattle, then Soto, downtown, and Ballard Interbay section. And level 3 is when we start stringing everything together and we're looking at costs as a whole. We will, if you looked at the summary, you saw that we were already trying to project may require third-party funding, just so that everybody's aware that, if you're asking for long tunnels everywhere, it's going to cost a lot of money, and we need to come up with that money some other way.
So maybe my main point is, it looked like they're the two that had only 2 stations in West Seattle as opposed to 3.
Right.
We're kind of falling out to the very bottom, and then I think there's a risk there that you don't bother studying them, and that as a result, you never really fully understand the financial impact or potential savings that could be brought in front of the elected leadership and say, look, if you're willing to concede a certain amount of watershed, and find ways that, and agree that a 10-minute watershed is adequate service to the junction, that, you won't have to go back to the public and ask for $300 million, at least for this portion of the line. And so I'd hate to see that prematurely eliminated from study, so that we lose that.
Yeah.
Recognize that. And
So I just, one thing to add is, we as staff, we cannot eliminate. We present the analysis that we did.
Okay.
And stakeholder advisory group are the ones who's making the recommendation. So the next group will be going to make the recommendation with the elected leadership group. Those are the people that you vote for to represent you.
Right.
So your voice, you could also approach
Yeah,
them.
it's still
and-
reasonable. Maybe it's the way, some of the things I read on the blog and some write-ups, maybe it's the words tonight, made it sound like 2 of the options were eliminated. Like that I've heard that word eliminated multiple times. And I guess if it was instead said, the SAG recommended these 3,
Exactly.
but none of
It's the
them have been
recommendation.
eliminated, then I probably would be able to rehear this entire meeting in a different way, which is good.
The other thing I want to add is that, and this is really important, and during this SAG meeting, there was a presentation on consistency with the ST3 plan. And I think when we speak to our attorneys, they say, this ST3 voter-proof plan includes 3 stations in West Seattle. So we do have to highlight that. And we as staff cannot make the determination that two stations is acceptable. It's something that is our contract with our voters. And I think we're not really sure where that conversation could go, which is why we said potentially inconsistent with the ST3 plan. But that's something, and cost is a factor too, because that's also part of what's in the ST3.
If it came down to whether, a particular reading of the legislation that passed and how it could be interpreted as to whether it was providing adequate service with some level of flexibility or not, we happen to have a lot of experience now, unfortunately, with a lot of legal proceedings, and we could assist with that if it was helpful at all. But I doubt you want that. But in any case, if you studied it and said, look, I don't know, there's a potential barrier here, which there might be a legal impediment to this, but if you're willing to pursue this and ask your legal team to think through the legal interpretation of this, this is the potential savings or outcome that you could face. It feels like a reasonable thing to do.
It's not something that we as staff can push at this point.
I would say push, but there's 2 of them in your list so far that have that.
Yeah.
So clearly it's made it as far as level 1. So why
Well,
not?
they were a direct representation of what was in person
So Sound Transit Board ultimately can direct us
Yeah,
to evaluate.
to evaluate this.
that's all I'm asking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes,
So, 3 quick pieces of feedback for consideration. And first of all, I want to say thanks for coming out. Secondly, I also want to appreciate your role as staff. You much like waiters in a restaurant, you sit right in the middle between the chefs in the kitchen and the customers at the table. So I want to empower you as staff by giving you feedback that you can give to the SAG, right? So it's not coming from you as staff, it's coming from me as a community member. So 3 things. First of all, I completely agree that so you can tell them that you heard from the community, that the elected representatives from West Seattle, from the city council, need to be talking about how to work on a golf course alignment. You shouldn't have to wait for the city to pick up the phone, so you can tell them that the community said that. The second thing is I want you to stop and listen for just 7 seconds to what you hear outside. That's the sound of livability. And there's a strain of thought in the community right now that somehow what we've been asking for in terms of tunneled stations is some sort of special accommodation for aesthetics. This is about livability. It's about noise. I've lived in Boston and I've lived in New York City. I've lived in places with mixed mode above ground and below ground, and I can guarantee you, if it's above ground, a summer night doesn't sound like this. So I think what I would like you to carry back on my second point is that livability and noise is of critical importance to this neighborhood. And the third thing is this issue of 3 stations and 2 stations, and Rich alluded to it. I understand that from staff's position, the lawyers may see some sort of conflict. However, I consider it to be a false choice that somehow by the elimination of the Avalon station, that you're somehow underserving the community. And I think, quite frankly, through a considered discussion at the SAG board, and I would encourage you to give them my feedback as a member of the community, that there could be money available to get the kind of service that you need, whether it's adding cars, but that walk shed is not so great, in my view, that we can't talk about 2 stations.
So I just want to point out that the SAG is not actually meeting before the elected leadership group. I would say that they would be the people.
Yeah.
Well, I'm asking you as staff to represent to whomever you need, to whomever you come in contact with. And I understand you can't on your own do this, but I'm asking you in your roles as staff to say, this is what we're hearing from the community. I think that's a reasonable request, is it not?
Jot that down on May 5th.
Yes, we'll certainly.
Yes, yes, exactly. That would be really helpful.
I would second.
Just for time purposes, why don't we just take 2 more questions, and then we'll release you all into the wild on this nice night. I really appreciate your time, so.
Going back to the golf course, you mentioned, and I don't know whether or not that could be considered a park. I mean, I could see it as an open space, but people have to pay to, use the golf course. So, having said that, I think in case of public, projects, there are, one example that comes to mind is technically you can't, have roads go over wetlands and so on, but for public, purposes, that could be done if it's a, public project. So I think there perhaps could be some mitigations done to the golf course, and maybe the use of golf course could be more extended such that there could be other uses that general public could use. So I just want you to think about that or discuss it with whoever you're discussing it.
Thank you.
Bill, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to let everybody know, I'm